Good evening. We at Roja Muthaiah Research Library and the Dravidian Professional Forum are delighted to have this discussion on Dr. Jeyaranjan's book, A Dravidian Journey. It gives me immense pleasure to invite Dr. PTR, Minister for Finance and Human Resources Management, Government of Tamil Nadu, and founder of DPF, to lead this discussion. Dr. PTR and Dr. Ranjan are defining public intellectuals of our time. When the DMK was voted back to power last year, the state's finances were in a terrible conditions. Institutional arrangements were fragile, and the impact of pandemic was so huge that our economy looked very bad. It is vital to remember these contexts to understand the type of turnaround brought by Dr. PTR to the Tamil Nadu's economy. Academics have defined the role of public intellectual in various manners. According to them, public intellectuals are moral conscience of society simply because they think. To think is to question, to call for freedom, and to invoke the right to disobey. Our intellectuals have to be reflective, philosophical beings, philosophical in the sense that they think about issues, addresses contemporary social problems, and see them as the legacies of previously unresolved issues of social injustice. Dr. PTR and Dr. J Jeyaranjan have shouldered the responsibility of being public intellectual of our time. They have delivered on three fronts. First, they make a genuine intellectual contribution. That is, there has to be something original and important about what you are doing. Second, they communicate with a large non-sectarian audience. And finally, the third, they generate a response and move the debate where you start making a splendid departure in your arguments. They set the tone for development debates and help us to confront the forces of centralization with ease and erudition. In a different context, I had called Jeyaranjan's contribution as the best explanatory journalism in an Indian language. Explanatory journalism is a category for Pulitzer Prize in the US. The Brookings Institute has a definition for explanatory journalism. It says, explanatory journalism aspires to provide essential context to the hourly flood of news or simply separate fact-checking operations and the mobilization of a rich array of irrelevant information made possible by a new technology, but presented to the public in accessible and digestible formats. It is fact-based, data-rich, but doesn't shy away from making arguments that flow from evidence, even at the risk of being charged with taking sides. At this juncture of extreme centralization, profound observations by Dr. PTR and Dr. Ranjan keeps the democratic space for a decentralized polity and policy open. May I request Dr. PTR to lead the discussion, please. So you can open it with your observation of the book and specific questions you have for the books. And Dr. Jeyaranjan can answer. Then you can get larger.
First, let me welcome everybody to this wonderful evening. I apologize, I was a few minutes late. Traffic is even worse than I thought. I guess we still have some development work to do in Adayar. I want to start by thanking Roja Muthaiah Library, the director, for not just this event, but a year's worth of, I guess about the 1-year anniversary of starting the club, the book club. Before we get into the book itself and the articles and the issues, let me maybe just step back a little and talk about two or three things. One, the importance of an institution like the Roja Muthaiah Library, which the government of Tamil Nadu has recognized. We've increased the grant and allocated more space. There are very few institutions that stay pure to intent, and of course came out of one gentleman's collection and vision. But I think the Roja Muthaiah Library serves as an intellectual beacon that draws the right kind of people for the right reasons to the right cause. And an example of some of the brilliant and original work it does is the book published by our very own Mr. Balakrishnan on Indus to Vaigai, the journey of a civilization. I can't think of anybody else who would have inherently sponsored such scholarly work and then published it, not for profit, but for the dissemination of ideas. When we started the DPF, that was the logic that we took in a movement that is otherwise a century old. I felt like we were losing our way a bit into the mundane, into the dreary daily politics. And at the time, we started with the logic that ideas are the lifeblood of a movement. It's the constant churn, the questioning anew, the lack of contentment, the lack of willingness to be satisfied with the status quo. That is the root of all progress, and certainly for our movement, the Dravidian movement, the time was right, I think, to move along that front. Because you see, in many ways, the movement was a victim of its own success. On the front of social justice, though there remains a lot to be done, there was a significant progress, and we didn't talk about it a lot. And if we take the representation of the people in this room, or a cross-section of the people who have graduated from college this year, the impact of the movement is huge. But we don't talk a lot about it, we don't quantify it, we don't rebroadcast it, we don't back it up with data and statistics. And so when I entered politics, both in the DMK as an MLA, but also then as the DMK IT wing head, we started these new series, and it was not about today's political debate, but a series called Dravidathal Elindom. We talked about the origins of the movement, why it was relevant, what it achieved, and what was the philosophical foundation, and how that translated to practical outcomes. And as I say again and again, having a good idea or a good philosophy is a good beginning, but till you get the result, really anybody's philosophy is as good or bad as anybody else's. Till we start seeing outcomes, we start seeing concrete results. So, of course, we are never satisfied. I recall at the Golden Jubilee of the Justice Party, my grandfather's speech was about the fact that we had made progress in social justice, but certainly not enough progress on economic development. There's a lot of noise these days about, whatever they call freebies or welfare spending, state spending to alleviate poverty or limitations in quality of life. It gave us the chance to really reassess who we are and why we're different from other people. And in the course of this debate, I happened to go and start doing some reading, and some, more intellectual than me friends started sending me stuff. And one of them was articles from the Constitution. And if you read Article 38 of the Constitution, it says explicitly that the aim of this government, of this republic, shall be to further justice, social, economic, and political. That's in the Constitution. It's not, something that we thought up, though our movement predates the Constitution by several decades. It's in the Constitution that it is the job of the government and of elected officials and of government servants and bureaucrats to bring that kind of justice as the outcome. And as I said, in many places, including recently, day before yesterday, it is only that will keep a society together. If you have increasing disparity and if you have increasing kind of concentration of wealth in a few hands, then you get the outcome that Karl Marx predicted in the manifesto that says eventually the labor says, why should all the returns go to the capital and not enough to me? My life doesn't improve. My children don't get access. Why should I stay at the bottom of the pyramid? And the bottom of the pyramid is a lot larger in number than the top. And then you have rebellion and social unrest. So both from the notion of democracy as the antidote to unrestrained capitalism and the falling of a organized way of life, as well as from the core values that we come from, it is important that these notions of justice, social, economic, and political, continue to be restated and reinvigorated in the context of everyday life. Because what was the scope of inequity, let's say 100 years ago, is something completely different now. There was no notion of access to internet or technology. Now that is a fundamental right. If those who have it are profoundly better off than those who don't have it because of the universe of information that's available if you have a smartphone, and that is not available if you don't have one. So in some ways, we have increased the gap between the haves and the have-nots quite a bit. Of course, one could argue that the marginal cost of having access has come down a lot compared to, let's say, 20 years ago. But these are the kinds of debates we ought to have. So in that context, both because it's the anniversary of the joint effort of the DPF and the book club, and the Roja Muthaiah library to have this book club. Also because I must say a few words about Professor Jeyaranjan. Before the elections, he and I had a chance to go and campaign together. And why I want to say this is, it was the opposite of this place. It was a strip of, muddy land on the edge of a canal, between a canal and a road in my constituency. And it was the, April or March when it was hot as anything. And there we were with maybe 50 people or 100 people around us. And then all the residents of the buildings looking on and talking about economic policy and, deficits and budgets and spending. And yet there was enough resonance there. The job of politicians, policy experts, is to translate concepts like that to the common man, to the voter, to the man who decides in a democracy who gets to run the government and who gets to sit in which seat. And so in that context, I think before we ever came to power, Professor Jeyaranjan was doing a yeoman's job because he already had a huge following on TV, in social media, where people could understand the concepts of how a government ought to run, what was fair, what was wrong, what was just, how did the parts of the puzzle fit together, and the basics of economics, public finance, etc. It was therefore quite a delight after the election that the professor should be asked by the Chief Minister to become the Vice Chairman of the Planning Commission. He has already brought new life to that role. Excuse me. As it's in my department, I know we have increased the support, we have increased the staffing, we have increased the commitment, the procedures. I think the Chief Minister himself personally has attended to the Commission's events and offices multiple times. I certainly get reports from there. We use that to inform our progress. But I think, today I would like this to be more about all of you who have taken the time to come here. And so I wanted to just put this kind of broader context, explain the thinking and the way, the thinking of why we do what we do and the way we do it. I'll just ask Professor Jeyaranjan a couple of questions, and then I'm going to start taking inputs from the people. from the audience, if that's okay. So let me start, Professor, by asking you, how did you first get interested in this unique approach to economics, where it is people-driven and ground data-driven, as opposed to most economists who sit in offices and read other people's data and start doing analysis?
Before I answer that question, I would like to thank Honorable Minister for taking time off to read the book as well as to come down here and be part of this program. As he said, even before the elections, I was doing this kind of work apart from my regular this kind of academic work. And in fact, I have never told the minister that my career as a very important starting point with an introduction to his father. In fact, I never told him what happened in 1980. I was to go for MA Economics, in fact, in the Madurai University. So in the veranda, one of his friends ran into me in the Madurai University and he asked me, "Why are you here?" I said, "I've come to apply for MA Economics." Then by the time his father came out of the room, and then he introduced me to him and he said, "Why are you here?" I said, "I have come to join MA Economics." He said, "There is a new course known as MSc Mathematical Economics. Why don't you join that?" I said, "I don't know what it is." He said, "Forget about it." He just asked for the application in the registrar's office. And then immediately the application came. He just wrote it on the application, admit him in MSc Mathematical Economics, and he straight away drove to Ooty for his annual, that retreat kind of a thing. He goes every year. That's how I joined this Mathematical Economics. And that in fact brought me here to Chennai to do my PhD at the Madras Institute of Development Studies. And when I joined the institute, they took me as a person who is capable of building models, in fact, because I did mathematical economics. And that was one reason why they took me. That is one. And also I could score very high marks in the entrance examinations because of that. Because at that time, the person who said the question paper was from London School of Economics. And he thought, when he looked into my CV, he thought, no, I can be a good asset as a student for this place. So the way in which he said the questions was properly balanced, in the sense some of them were descriptive type and some of them were quantitative type. And I was very comfortable with the quantitative type. So I just opted to write only the quantitative part of it. So my answer sheet was just like, 1 page or something for the whole exam. But I scored, I think, I scored out 100 out of 100 or something. So I got selected and I joined a PhD. Then my supervisor at that time, MIDS had only one supervisor, that was Professor C.T. Kurian. 5 or 6 of us were his students. And all of them were looking into the political economy of Tamil Nadu on various aspects. Then he asked me, "What are you interested in?" I said, "I am interested in, I don't know what, I was not very sure. Because the university education doesn't tell you or allow you to ask questions, in fact. And particularly from that side, from that mathematical economic side, you don't ask questions. You just try to derive things and show the proof and get away with it. When I came here, that was completely, like Latin to me, the way in which MIDS was functioning, the kind of scholarship that was going on. Then he said, feel comfortable, you read whatever you want. Then I started reading about various things. At that time, he wrote the book, The Dynamics of Rural Transformation in Tamil Nadu. Basically using the second data. He didn't do any field work at that time. Only using the second data, he had written that book. I started reading that. And then from then on, I moved on to several things. And at that moment, the social sciences, particularly in places like MIDS, was not strictly confined to economics alone. Now we tended to read about history, sociology, anthropology, economics, and all those things. And particularly, the MIDS was a place where many of these village studies were happening at that time. Because that the 2-3 articles here in this book is about the Slater villages. Precisely at that time, that work was going on. And I was amazed by the kind of work that was done there. I thought economics is whatever I have studied for 5-6 years during my graduation and post-graduation was completely different from what I was seeing here. Then I started picking up those kind of studies, and then I found that it's much more interesting and much more revealing about what's happening in the economy and society. Then I slowly got introduced to that, and I started. There was vast literature, in fact, on various aspects of that kind of structures and changes. And that was the time in throughout the third world, there was these kinds of studies were happening. So we got closely associated with all those things, and there were a lot of exchanges between University of Oxford, Cambridge, and other such places. So you also get associated with some such scholars. And that's how it started, and I never looked back. In fact, I traveled the whole thing. And then, in fact, at one point, Professor Kurian told me that the time of political economy is getting over. So it was turning towards quantitative economics, but I didn't shift towards that again. I remain with this, and all through my career, I have done, as you may understand from this book, it was all doing intense field work and then writing about what's happening in the Tamil society particularly. That's what I have been doing, let us say, for the past 35, 40 years. That is the brief history of how I landed up like that.
Well, that's, of course, at a personal level, very enlightening, but I think broadly for everybody, it's very enlightening because I'll ask it slightly differently, or maybe I'll just state it relative to my own experience. What do you learn in the textbooks? What do you even learn from research papers and studies and all that? At least for a politician, there is no substitute to actually going out to the field and talking to human beings. And if you have most politicians ought to have the basic skill of empathy, of being able to relate to people. Certainly for me, going out on the streets campaigning was a huge eye-opener. And just like when I went to markets after studying a lot of finance and economic theory, I used what I observed in the day-to-day life to relate back to the theory, and it became a virtuous cycle. I validated or understood the nuances of what I had read after this, and then I used that to kind of understand this and so forth. In politics, at least for me, because I was not educated as a developmental economist, certainly the field work has been the kind of guiding light, which is why I say practically that I don't think one can be a good minister or a good senior administrator without having a lot of experience on the ground. And if anything, I need to get more of that. Let me ask the question, how many people do you think there are in India or in other parts of India who have this approach of connecting the theoretical concepts or even the quantitative economic concepts to actual human experience, and connecting that to lives changed, villages transformed, suburban areas, the blight, etc. Is this something that happens in all the other states and around India? I know it happens a lot, as you say, in other places, and you got that approach. But is this a bit unique to Tamil Nadu, or is it common across all the states?
In fact, this is a legacy of the Council of Social Science Research that was started as a part of this Nehruvian ideal towards democracy. So slowly what happened was each state started having its own Indian Council for Social Science Research centers. So for Tamil Nadu, it was Madras Institute of Development Studies. For Kerala, it is the Center for Development Studies. And similar such institutions you find all over the country. And many of them were started by eminent kind of people, economists or sociologists, who had a commitment, as you rightly said, that empathy for people. They had enormous kind of an empathy towards people. And it was all started by them, in fact. It doesn't mean that all the institutes were started like there were institutions like, few out and out, they were focusing on the quantitative methods and quantitative techniques. But large number of them were focusing on this. I know for sure that at least about 10, 15 institutions in this part of in the country who are focusing on this. And at that time, what happened was there was a clear separation from the universities. Universities became just teaching centers, and research was shifted to the research centers. And there are advantages and disadvantages. Universities have completely lost touch with what's happening in the ground. And these institutions have completely lost touch with the students, except for very few, lucky few who could get into the doctoral or MPhil programs. But for that, there was a clear divide and there was a clear ocean of difference. These centers were the ones who were not trying to develop this political economy framework and then try to combine sociology, anthropology, history, economics, and all those things, despite the fact that economics always had an upper hand. And slowly after the 80s and 90s, what happened was it happened all over the world. In fact, the quantification became very important and specialization became very, very important. And this kind of broad basing and spending a lot of time to get to know all these things. That was all becoming the past. In fact, there was a clear regimentation, and there was also the kind of funding that the students got. It got narrowed and narrowed. Earlier, they were very generous in terms of time that they were given. Earlier, when I did my PhD, I could get fellowship for about 4.5 years. And then you can take your own sweet time to complete your thesis. You can spend a lot of time. But slowly the universities as well as the institutions started reducing the time as well as the money. If you hear now, so pathetic, students are given only fellowship for 2 years. I don't know, with 2 years, how can they produce such a good PhD or whatever? Because there is a complete difference between the kind of education that you have at the university level and the kind of requirement that you need for a PhD program. There's a complete disjunction. By the time they get to know the ropes, the time is up. That's why the kind of level of a dropout is so high in these PhD programs. That apart, all these institutions, to answer your question, all these institutions were like MIDS, CDS, and then Bangalore, there is a place called the Institute for Social and Economic Change. And then there is an institute in Hyderabad, an institute in Kolkata, Lucknow, and there are very few institutions in the north. South, we had many institutions. In Orissa, they have one small institute. But all these institutes were trying to understand the problems of the people of the state because of the emphasis given to the development economics. Because that was the dream, to develop, develop the economy. That's why one institute is known as Institute for Economic Growth, whereas all these institutions were known as Institute of Development. So there's a clear understanding. That was for growth and this is for development. So for the Trivandrum Institute was founded by K.N. Raj. The MIDS was founded by Malcolm Asisha and later on led by Professor Kurian. And Mahalanobis found that Calcutta Center. And similarly, a leading economist found the Bangalore Center. And then Hyderabad was again led by another famous economist. All of them were development economists. And that's why the focus on development was lasted for nearly about 30 years. And now they are losing the focus. That's what I feel.
Yeah, it's news to me, though it's not my department. I'm not that well informed. I think back to my own PhD studies, though of course I changed major between every degree, but I think it took me almost 2 years to just get the basic coursework in before I could even defend my dissertation proposal, and then it took. So we have to rethink some of those things. I think broadly there's some structural reform needed in our universities, but this highlights that. Let me just ask one last bit of a delicate question before we move to the audience question. I think there are many things that Dravidian movement got right. I think, though I may have 100 differences with the ADMK politically, I would say even in its worst form, it did better than most other governments outside of Tamil Nadu, and certainly more than the BJP governments and so forth. What is maybe one of the things we have not got that right at all? And this is not political. I'm saying we have been in office only a year and a half, so we can afford to take the hit if it's even if it's about us. But broadly, over the last, let's say, 50 years, what are maybe the 2 or 3 things that you really think we have not touched the right way, or we have not touched at all, or we have not invested in enough at all, that we should really be thinking about differently or more or at all?
That we experience in the education system. Yeah. No, one thing which I find very alarming is, the kind of decline that we experience, particularly in the college education system, and that's going to cost us enormously. And as I told you, the kind of output that we get from the universities is really pathetic compared to some of the leading institutions that have been that have emerged during the past decade. And there is complete ignorance on the part of the university teachers, professors, and all those people, and you find it across all over the place. And I think government after government, I think we haven't paid our enough attention. In fact, I was telling our chief minister that we should do something about it. So we are convening a meeting of all the vice chancellors on the 30th of this month for them to to bring them on board so that some change can be effected. What we find is some of the universities haven't revised their syllabus for donkey years. Well, whereas the world is changing so fast and so enormously, complete stagnation in terms of course content, and consequently, despite the fact that we trumpet that our gross enrollment ratio is over 52%, we find many of the courses are there are no takers, despite the fact that we are spending crores and crores for them, and that I think hasn't got our attention so far. That is one important area.
I'll just close out by echoing. It's always helpful to get these issues looked at a couple of different ways. Most of our universities are either deeply in the red or completely void of funds. So then we look a bit deeper because we are finance. It's not our day job to run the universities philosophically or policy-wise, but just to make sure financially. And then we find that much like the government of Tamil Nadu, many of these universities are run more as employment programs rather than for the purpose of education or research. So there's something profoundly wrong. And if I really go, I'll take one step more from that and say what I said in the assembly, which is that the government of Tamil Nadu spends within a few hundred rupees per student as the Kendriya Vidyalayas. And as much as we criticize authoritarian overreach and defend our rights and all that, I don't think anybody would argue that the average government school produces the same results as the average Kendriya Vidyalaya. So it's not a question of money. There's something structurally that needs improvement, that needs fixing. And so, both at the collegiate level and at the school education level, I completely agree. I'm glad that somebody of your erudition and in your seat is looking at it. And we are eager as the finance department and as the administration to implement the changes as the discussions throw up, because it's a delicate balance. On the one hand, for good or bad, we have privatized education more than most states, and we have allowed it earlier than most people. But on the other hand, I completely agree with you. There are many, many, many places where there are no takers for seats. There are many government colleges and government universities that are bereft, zero students, and yet the departments are functioning. There are things we need to think about, because in a way, what the private entrants have done is demanded market efficiency of the government institutions. When you had no other choice, you took whatever you got. Now there are choices. And even if you asked me 10 years ago, 15 years ago, people didn't realize how to pick a college or, which is better, which is worse. Now it's very clear. In my time in politics, in 6 years, I have seen the average student or the parent has gotten a lot more sophisticated. What is a course worth paying money for or borrowing money for, and what is not? So I think it's the right time for us to look into that. So that's a very good point. Maybe we can just throw it open to questions, unless you have a different.
Actually, I have a small question. One of the interesting statement which has come through your EPW article is Tamil Nadu's journey towards a post-agrarian society. Could you actually explain what do you mean by a post-agrarian society?
See, it's not just the kind of the composition of income for the households. It's much more than that. In the sense, you see the kind of power structure that prevail the in the villages, and in many of the states you will not find that transformation there. Whereas in Tamil Nadu, the power structure has been completely, demolished. In fact, whatever remains, you find it so oppressive. But the complete destruction of the rural power is one great thing that has happened in the state, and that is precisely why the kind of rapid progress that we are making in terms of our economy is made possible because of that. That is my essential understanding of not doing all these kinds of work. And I would attribute the greatest role played by the state in that. Like for instance, you see, there are a lot of complaints about the weakness of our third tier government. Okay, that is the Panchayat Raj institutions. But I would argue, I have been arguing that is precisely why the power structure could be demolished. Earlier, I remember school teachers have to go to the Panchayat president. Whatever government functions, the government was the president. Who can be the village president? And the village records are entirely kept with his brother-in-law, his sister. One of his cousins would be the revenue official there at the local level. So what they first did was they just made all these departments as line departments, so that they are not answerable to the local power. That is one. Secondly, that is true for the revenue administration as well. The village administrative officer is a person who is appointed by the Tamil Nadu Public Service Commission. He can be from anywhere, and that post is a transferable post. So no single family can exercise power for a long period of time. And similarly, they introduced the reservation system for the Panchayat presidents. Not only that, at third level, they made all the officials as at the local level as line department. They are answerable only to the superiors, not to the local government. And that is one reason why that power structure, they could take the power off from. That is one. And second one is, you see, you take the public distribution system. When you have 33 to 34,000 PDS shops, which caters to almost the entire population, like the 2,000, we had some 2 crore and odd cards in the state. When you have that kind of a food system, nobody depends on others for food. Earlier, the entire power structure played through food. When you control the food, you control the mass. Now, when you systematically demolish that, what happens is they are relieved from that power structure. In fact, you tend to hear that the landowners are complaining about 2 things. One, about the PDS, and the second one is MGNRG. Now, MGNRG, what it has done is, they were not the employers anymore. They are also employers. They are not the sole employers. Earlier, they were the sole employers. Now, state is the employer, and they are also employers. So there is a competition between these 2 employers. And that gives enormous leverage to the people who actually work. And that democratizes the whole environment there. So this kind of changes happen only in 2 places in the country. One is Kerala, the other one is Tamil Nadu. You just rework the rural cost. And that is why you call this as the post-agrarian society. Okay, that is the most essential part. The second part is, of course, you see the composition of income, like the latest situation assessment of agriculture in Tamil Nadu. It says that hardly 5% of the population depend entirely on agriculture. Solely on agriculture, not solely on agriculture. That the dependence is hardly 5% of the population, rural population. I'm not talking about the urban population, rural population. And another interesting thing is 1/3 of the income comes entirely from non-agriculture. Now, when you call a society as agricultural society, these are the essential characteristics of the society. In terms of economy, they depend mostly on agriculture for the livelihood. That is not the case. And secondly, they have an enormous power structure that has been built over a period with all its nuances for a period of 2,000 years or 3,000 years, and that's all gone now. That old Andai and Adime, it's not there. So that is why we call it as it has transformed from being an agrarian society to a post-agrarian society. And if you go to any village here, you will in Tamil Nadu, you will find that there is another chapter on this rural non-farm employment, where you will find the kind of diversification that has taken place in terms of occupation. enormous diversity. One thing is Tamil Nadu is the most organized state. Similarly, if you take the large states, Tamil Nadu is one of the largest states where no enormous diversification has taken place in terms of occupation. And that's why we call this as it's a post-agrarian society.
You can open it up. Yes, we'll start. Yeah.
Good evening, sir. I'm Ashok from ACJ. So in economic theory, governments are entities that provide public goods. However, in TN, we have shown welfare results by providing private goods and without significant issue in the deficit. And is TN an exception to the theory of public goods, or do we need a new theory that factors in Tamil Nadu's growth?
Well, let me take a crack at it. I don't think whatever the government provides is a public good. I'm not sure that you say it's a private good that the government provides, right? Because if you look at different societies provide different things as the government provided. In Sweden, they give you 1 year of paternity leave. That's a public good because it's given by the government. So I'm not sure that I would make the distinction that only water and roads and aircraft and ports are public goods, but giving rice and giving TVs is private good. That's my definition. But I'll let the professor say. Government gives private goods.
Yeah. In fact, my views is what our minister just told you. In fact, yesterday there was an interview where I told them, how do you decide now about whether it's a public good or a private good? Like, for instance, when he talked about the internet connectivity, earlier it was not there. Now it has come, and there is a clear divide. Now, any government, any democratic government should try to bridge that gap. Now, will you call it as a private or as a public? That is the thing. Similarly, like for instance, in another interview, I was telling them, 30 years ago, the government, when it tried to intervene in the health sector, it was trying to address the infectious diseases. But the profile, disease profile has changed during the past 30 years. Now it's much more of non-communicable disease. Now we have to focus on that as well. That's why the government is putting enormous focus on the what you call as the Makkali Thedi Maruthuvam scheme. Okay, it's not right. When new issues emerge, then you have to address that. Like that's why I tell you the agenda. Wherever I go, I say this agenda of our politics. Now, what we have in our party as well as in the government is the one where there is no point of destiny where you will reach and then it's all over. Like you remember now what Abraham Lincoln told about democracy. Democracy, you have to constantly strive for it. Okay, you can never reach that. Similarly, social justice is something you have to constantly strive. You can never reach that because situations change. And it demands new kinds of programs, new kinds of interventions. It's not that we have win over we will win over the reservation person and that's the end of it. It's not like that. So that's why the political understanding of the entire movement lies there, in fact.
Yeah, Mr. Bolivan.
I'm only one publisher. Today, one of the biggest challenges all over the world, even in the recent Davos economic forum, international economic forum, they discussed about this. The 3 A's which are luring on us. One is automation, artificial intelligence, and algorithms. These are going to rob the entire youngsters' population's job. It's going to be very vulnerable for them in the future. What is that we are planning? Because experts like you have been talking about that. Very glad you spoke about revising the syllabuses of universities. I know for the last 10, 12 years, many of them have not even changed the language syllabus, leave alone the subjects and other things. So what is that we have, to tune with the international scenario at our place or in our Dravidian model to take care of this employment for the children?
In fact, we are acutely aware of these gaps that have emerged over a period of time. And a couple of weeks ago, we had a marathon meeting for about 3-4 days to address this issue. What we did was we visited many of these leading institutions in our state. Also, we tried to understand what the other institutions are trying to do. And we have collected all that systems that I have put in place there. And we try to mimic that through a government funded program at 2 levels. One, for the technical institutions, we have got into an arrangement with the Tata Sons, and they are going to upgrade the skills of the teachers as well as the institutions and make it on par with the current day requirements. That is at one level. At another level, we have launched a new program. It's known as non-Mudalvar. So where we try to bridge all these gaps, in fact, and we are earmarked a lot of money for that, and it's going to be very seriously taken, and we are launching it very soon. In fact, for those programs to address these issues. In fact, like what you just said, about that gap. That is at the second level. At the third level, as I was answering for our minister about one of the major gaps, we are trying to address the lacuna in the university system. We are going to go to them to revise the syllabus periodically and bring in a system whereby they respond immediately to the changes that are happening around. So these are the three attempts that we are making. Efforts.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hello, sir.
I think the discussion is more about interviewing either me or minister, rather than about the book. Anyway.
Hi, I am a student journalist from Asian College of Journalism. My question is regarding your remark on the quality and quantity of academics dropping in universities. However, I see that in today's day and age, that academic spaces are constantly under threat. Academic expression is stifled actively by the state. And I'm not talking about any particular state, but in general, I see a trend. How do you then expect good quality academicians to come out and express their work?
This is a concern which we also share. Okay. But we have to find a way out. We have been wrestling with that. These kinds of interventions. We have to safeguard our domain and try to, at the same time, we have to set right in the problem that we have. There are two threats. One is threat from outside. The second is threat from within. So while guarding our domain, we also have to separate our systems. These are the two things we try to do. I don't know how successful we will be.
Good evening, sir. I am Vinod Kumar. You have touched upon this PDS system, how we are doing well in our state. So actually, recently the Union government has released that National Food Security Act Index. So in that index, they have ranked Tamil Nadu in the 9th position. Despite having a strong PDS base in states like Tamil Nadu and Kerala, they were not unable to come to the top position. Do you think, is it really, do we have any problems in the system, or is it behind any political reasons that the Union government tries to create a counter narrative to this Dravidian model by projecting these states in a by pulling down their ranks and all?
No, I haven't looked into the composition of the index. Usually they construct an index and then they try to rank it. I haven't looked into that. I'll have a look into it and then I'll let you know what is the problem there.
See, before that, the question is about Professor Jeyaranjan's book. We'll take it first, and the general questions can wait for a minute.
It's not on
Jeyaranjan, sir.
Okay, then just wait for some time. Oh, yes, please. So it's on the book, please go ahead.
Okay, this is in general. It's about the very title about this Dravidian model. And as Dr. Jeyaranjan rightly pointed out, because I got this, the context, the historical context of that. Sorry. Okay, the historical context, particularly with the institutional dynamics of the MIDS, I got very wonderful in this evening. I could easily relate with that one. But my specific point of a title, because when I read the earlier book about the Cambridge book, the Dravidian model itself. I am from a political science background, but I'm looking into particularly the contributions of the economists. My point is about the Dravidian model, or for that the model building itself. We have a Kerala model, and then that as a counter narrative as a Gujarat model and all. It has been completely a kind of a quantitative. That's purely on the measuring of something it's about. But what am I looking into in a much more way? For example, when you look into the Western, particularly in Britain and all, the very idea of the poverty itself, it's emerged and then it's diversified. They talked about the relative poverty, the very wonderful work of Peter Townsend from the sociological background and all. So that the British socialists, they incorporated in the 80s and 70s, they have stitched a narrative in a more in academic way, but not just being it is reduced into just a measuring. Because in terms of that, we have to show that kind of a burden of measuring something about it. It's not we have to measure about. What I'm looking into the anti-Dravidian movement, it's not something we're supposed to measure for all the 50 or 60 years. Rather, we have to develop how we are going to contribute this movement to the intellectual historiography, the intellectual history of the ideas in the way that the British socialists developed. They have quite moved from that, as you're very well aware about poverty and relative poverty, social exclusion. The very idea about the social exclusions that's been wonderfully articulated in a Dravidian movement much more earlier. And later, it's about the constitution. It's a concept of the well-being and all such things. So my point is, I've taken a lot of, my point is that whenever the discourse on a Dravidian model, it gives you much more a focus on again and again a measuring as something as we found it in the discussions about the Kerala model and then Gujarat model. This is my kind of observations or otherwise my engagement, those who are outsider from the economists. That's my.
I don't follow. I don't follow any.
I don't think the professors that I'll take that. I think let's just put this in context. Right? I don't recall the words Dravidian model spoken before 2017 or 18 or something. As best I can tell, it came about accidentally. That is, the India Today group had one conclave in Chennai for the first time. And then speaker after speaker came and first started telling us that we were, away from the national zeitgeist, that we were Periyarists and, we were freebie culture and we were, sophisticated ways of saying things like anti-national. And then we slapped back hard. The CM went and gave a speech, and then I went to a lot of panels. And we basically said that all of these epithets and nomenclatures and labeling and all was irrelevant. Show us the outcome, and then you tell us who is smarter, who is wiser, who is kinder, who is gentler, who has adhered to the Constitution and who has violated the Constitution. That's the basis on which this whole discussion turned. From there, it became very clear, I think, because that was the first time that all of these people had come to Tamil Nadu and we had this big discussion, that whatever they had been relegating us as a freebie state, as a kind of outlier state, as away from the national ethos state and all that, was complete nonsense. And what we had here was a spectacularly good outcome. And therefore, the words at that time, the Tamil Nadu model, and then eventually the Dravidian model came, and then the chief minister picked that as the basis on which we talk about it. But again, I'm not that wrapped up in the methodology. Call it Dravidian model, call it what you want, doesn't bother me. I am very, very, very clear that unless you can show results, what does it matter what your philosophy is? What does it matter what your motivation is? You might have the purest of intent, but if the society doesn't feel it, if human beings don't get the benefit of it, then what is the point? I mean, all of us can sit in our house and be geniuses. We have to get outcomes. So in that sense, I'm never going to step back from talking about outcomes, because outcomes matter. Outcomes change people's lives, means that something has happened. Therefore, I take pride and credit in the work, obviously because it came from the right philosophy, the right mindset, social justice, etc. There's still a lot of work to do. I agree with the professor that it's a never-ending journey. But I don't see why we should feel bad about focusing on outcomes. That's what distinguishes us from people who just have rhetoric. It must be about the outcomes. There's no reason why I would ever take back that approach.
See, as a journalist, I always remember two empirical evidences. One is in 1967, when DMK came to power, PDS was restricted to two cities in the state, Chennai and Coimbatore. And today, PDS is a statewide phenomenon, which means if you are looking at solid numbers, whether it is the spread of PDS or the way the administered prices mechanism operated and provided the welfare for the farm sector, it's a much more integrated approach what we have. And any other questions for Professor Jeyaranjan? Yes, please.
Professor, the discussion about Palakurichi village resurvey, which gives more inspiration for researchers in other disciplines also, like how the social institutions and line departments had created new transformation for the social structure in the rural system, is much inspiring for researchers in ecological sciences also. I'm a researcher from ecological sciences background who work on food systems in rural regions. So my question is, how similar kind of interventions in food systems, in agriculture systems, could bring more uptake of science-based, evidence-based management practices in the rural system to both increase the productivity as well as improve the conservation practices for soil and water resources. So, for example, in Andhra Pradesh, Raitu Bharosa Kendra and similar two different institutions are developed to take information to the villages among farming communities. So, BioVillage model of Professor M.S. Swaminathan, Evergreen Revolution paradigm calls for taking more information to the rural community. Similarly, like 6 months back, our finance minister created platform for small industries to understand how much union government entitlements are available for small industries. Similarly, we need knowledge transformation to the rural system. Could BioVillage model could be translated? Will that be a new institution which
Would it be more specific, please, so that?
Yeah.
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 I think we will take your suggestion into account and we will try to integrate it into the functioning of the agriculture department.
I'm Shubhashri Desikan. I'm a science journalist with a Hindu. I have two questions. One is already the central government being so aggressively, capitalist in a way, we can say that they have actually, now there's a lot of discussion about welfare schemes and freebies or whatever. So what are the other aspects of the Dravidian model that can be threatened by this kind of a ecosystem that we are in? That's one question. The other question is that when we say science and technology, science, usually the discussion moves on to technology and about what use science can be put to and so on. But basic sciences is a very important part of development. Does your book deal with it? And what is your advice for it? I would like to ask the minister also this question. Thank you.
Well, let me take the second part of the question. I think that, the professor's work happens to focus on empirical and sociological, and as he very clearly said, I'll say it even more, what can I say, openly, the breaking of the feudal system, right? That's what a post-agrarian society means. You have broken the caste hierarchy, you've broken the feudal system, you've broken the landlord-tenant model. That's because that's his area of focus. I think the second part of your question about the pure science and the natural kind of evolution of that, or the need to do that to stay competitive, I couldn't agree with you more. In fact, by coincidence, yesterday I was in Mumbai for some other event. I took the time to go spend 2-3 hours at the Institute for Fundamental Research at TIFR, learned of all the things they're doing. They're already expanding a bit. We're talking to them possibly about trying to do some more things in Tamil Nadu. So I think the need for pure science is not lost. And in fact, if you don't do pure science, then you're always going to be dependent on some country that does. One of China's great advantages was that nobody asked this question, and they allowed them to become the manufacturing powerhouse of the world without any second thought of the fact that they were giving away the technology by letting them develop the skill. Now, after the whole kind of de-risking and after COVID, it has completely changed. And part of the reason for China's slowdown is that they don't do enough pure science. Right? The communist model is not ideally suited to freedom of thought and expression. So in that sense, they have a limitation. So as a government, we are certainly focused on it. We have just come out with the R&D policy. There's the R component of it. It's not just the D. Certainly in a lot of other places, we will encourage collaboration or co-investment, like the TIFR as a case of this thing. On the threat, right, already there's the EWS, there's all this legislation on state subjects in agriculture, in this thing. Today I saw somewhere a statement by the Union Education Minister attributing opposition or lack thereof to the government of Tamil Nadu about the NEP. My question is, whatever it is we have to improve, how does it make sense that the government of India, the Union government of India, should write a syllabus or an approach to a syllabus effectively starting at Anganwadis up for a country which has such diverse kind of situations, right? Average education in Tamil Nadu is high school graduate. Average education in Bihar is elementary school dropout. How is it possible that the same kindergarten policy applies equally to these two states? You say he's a high school graduate of a poor syllabus. He's still a high school graduate, right? Clearly, that's different than elementary school dropout. Every advanced, developed society in the world, the decision about syllabus and how the children are taught gets pushed lower and lower and lower to that village, to that school board, to that town. That's true in almost any non-dictatorial country in the world. That's true in the US, it's true in the UK, it's true in Canada, it's true. Every developed society says the school board should be run by the parents of the children. How does it make sense in a country of 1.3 or 4 billion people that somebody sits in Delhi and tells you how all kindergarten kids should be educated? It's stupidity. It's profoundly wrong. And then he says, no, but they say they're not objecting to it, so we'll just have to have discussions. Why would anybody assume they have that much brilliance that they can create something that cannot be created? There's something structurally wrong. So, of course, they're going to keep encroaching. The good news, as best I can tell at least, there's some good news. The good news is that their appetite is far greater than their ability to execute. So they want to control everybody's life. They want to run everything. They can't even do their day job properly. The odds that they'll get all of this done right is very close to zero.
Thank you. I'm Pugal Gandhi, lawyer and executive coordinator of DPF. The topic is a unique topic because when we celebrate this first year success of this reading hub with the title Dravidian Journey. In fact, 1 year before we started with the book, The Journey of a Civilization. So from Journey of Civilization to the Dravidian Journey. My question is to our Honorable Minister and also Jeyaranjan sir. Taking cue from the opening remarks by the Honorable Minister, that Dravidian movement is becoming a victim of its own success. Mainly because we all know how Dravidian movement has made an attempt or largely successful in socio-economic gap, so that the marginalized section has come up in their life. And most of the time they have forgotten what the movement has done to them. But why we are not telling this narrative in the proper format? One example is, when in 1990s, when engineering education was liberalized from 3,000 seats to 1.5 lakh seats by Dr. Kalanyar to address the capitalistic needs, because with 3,000 seats, more people cannot study engineering and more people cannot come up in life. And this increase in the seats and the liberalization of engineering education led to people from all walks of life doing engineering and moving across the world in various forms. This is one of the success of Dravidian movement. That's why we have diaspora, Tamil diaspora across the world, rightly from all the communities. In others, won't have diaspora from all the communities. But when we are hurry in making this, why we are not bringing the social justice principles or what Dravidian movement has done as a curriculum in the engineering education? Because it doesn't mean that there should not be a curriculum in engineering education, so that people will be reminded of what is being told to them or what is being done to them. One simple example, because since I'm a lawyer, I'll just point out a simple example. In 1990s, when Professor Muthaiah brought this concept called a national law school, he was trying to address the demand of this capitalistic corporates, because at that time, the perception of law schools were different. So he brought these national law schools where he tried to train the lawyers with basic English, the good English, and also training in legal system, so that they will be trying to work in the corporate environment, so that the foreign investments may come. This was his idea. But being a student of Professor Menon, in 2000, later in 2002 and 2000, we always used to have a discussion. This model may not work as a good model in the long run, because you are not creating lawyers in the long run. You are creating legal consultants or the people who can work in the corporate environment, because lawyer is a different thing. So unless until we include something called justice system or anything, this will not work. This was realized by Professor Menon in the year somewhere in 2010, and he started including in the curriculum the justice system and also clinical legal education. Likewise, even today in Tamil Nadu, our curriculum, whether it is school education curriculum or higher education curriculum or even law schools, doesn't have a curriculum with respect to what this movement has done. In the sense, when Justice Party brought the voting rights first in the world, one of the first in the world, through the Hon.min system in the year the 1920s, brought education, and even Dr. Kalanyar gave the ancestral rights to women. No student of law know what is. They are just studying only what is a contract, what is a tort, what is the social aspect behind the law is not done. But as a government, particularly now we are in the government, what is the measures which we are trying to take to address this, so that Dravidian movement will not fall as a victim of its own success?
No, this your suggestion, I think I will pass it on to this committee now they have constituted. Look into the educational policy. There are members now. Dr. Aruna is here. I think it should have heard about your suggestion. I think there are other members, and let them decide now about whether it will fit into their overall scheme of things. We will do that.
Good evening. I'm Shankar here. Have we at this point of time have reached an inflection point where we need to move away from measuring the economy purely in terms of the oversimplified GDP numbers to a model which is more in consonance with the Dravidian model? Because politically, the narrative has been set forth very forcefully by the minister in several forums But as a discipline, as an discipline as an economist, do you think is there a time? I mean, we have reached a point of time where we can set an alternate, a parameter or a set of parameters to judge the economy, which truly represents the Dravidian model. That's my question.
In fact, I think, what our Honorable Minister has been doing is precisely that. Saying that, it's not just the numbers, these numbers alone, no? Then he narrates, the kind of distance that we have traveled, it encompasses, several other things, not just about the growth rate or not just about the NSDP. We start from there, but again, we go further, whereas no other persons involved in that kind of a narrative does that. Like, for instance, when he says, our gross enrollment ratio is like this, the number of doctors that we have for our population, and so on and so forth. It essentially talks about the kind of other things that we have done, not just talking about the GDP or per capita. Even there, we are not far behind. That's our contention. Okay, we are traveling on two tracks. One is on the economy as well as on the social change. That's why I always say that our objective had always been, our politics had always been transformative. That is our essential attempt. For the past 50 years, what you have been trying to do is to transform. It's not just the growth alone. Growth is different from transformation. That's it.
The point is being made very forcefully, but as a discipline, as an economist, is there a case for you to develop a model which reflects this argument, which reflects this narrative?
I think we have started doing it. Very recently, you have got 3-4 books now. One, our Vijay Bhaskar and Kalayasan written about the Dravidian model, and then there is another book, and another book is coming out. And this book, all these things addresses various slices of that history, and we need to have a lot more of such work to arrive at that kind of a theory. Theory can't come out from the vacuum. You need to have evidences built up over a long period of time, and then theory comes. So this is the beginning. That's what I feel.
If you don't mind, I'll just add to both the previous questions. See, everything starts with the results, right? You only get to talk if you deliver outcomes. Otherwise, everybody's view is equally valid. You say black, I say white, he says pink, you say blue. So in fact, I had a conversation with the Chief Minister last week about something else, and I told him, if we get this much attention, it's not because we talk different things. Many people talk different things. It's because we deliver superior results. That starts the basis for discussion and say, if I deliver superior results, why should I listen to you who cannot deliver my results? Then we have a basis to have a discussion. So I think there's two components to it. The harder component, which because the Chief Minister gives us the support, the freedom, the ability to execute professionally, we are doing reasonably well, that we deliver superior results. The movement has done it for 100 years. We do it in the last 15 months and will continue to do it for the next 3.5 years. There's maybe a second component of communicating that and using that to establish new benchmarks or new ways of evaluating progress, whether it's indices or a combined model or something like that, which certainly we'll take that on board and both in terms of communication strategy as well as some kind of a quantitative model. Try to put something together that shows and that can become a benchmark, so we can just, instead of having to go through this discussion again and again, say we are X on that index, everybody else is 10 less than X or 20 less than X. Yeah, certainly a point well taken.
My question is about this line department business. Your point about line department having a very strong effect on breaking down the relations of power is very well taken. But aren't we at a point where, at least historical juncture, where there needs to be some relook at convergence of line departments, particularly with reference to last mile populations. Because what worked for the majority of the population is not working for this marginalized population. My second question is about the limits of identity politics. I think the identity politics, the inherent problematization in identity politics is bringing back caste in a very, very insidious form. Now, are we ready to tackle it? What are we going to do about it? Should we do anything about it at all? Or should we focus, as the minister said, on outcomes and be happy about that?
In fact, no, I'll start answering from the second part of the question. For another question, I was answering another question. I told you that our politics is not confined to identity politics alone. Identity politics is a vehicle for us, that's all. But our politics is essentially a transformative politics. And you are well aware now the kind of discourse that we have had for the past 100 years. It doesn't stop with just Tamil identity alone. Okay. It talks about several other things. When you talk about self-respect, is it an identity politics? It's much more than that. So that's why I say that it tries to transform. It tries to liberate you. So this politics is not identity politics. That's my understanding. That is one. And secondly, about the kind of as I even before when I talked while I was talking about this making line departments, I said there are advantages and there are disadvantages. This is the disadvantage part of it. But when you take a decision, you have to weigh the options. When you weigh it, whether you retain the old power structure or you don't, that is the question. And we wanted, if you want the rural to completely have some kind of a freedom, new kind of a freedom, this is the cost that you pay. Okay. That what does it mean? It means, let us say, earlier from your village, whoever has been the administrative revenue administrator, they will decide whom to give the certificate and whom not to give. Now, this is not the question. It is not the question now. The question is, you have to give 100 rupees or 200 rupees to get it. Earlier, somebody were completely denied of that. Now, nobody is denied. Only thing is you pay a cost. That is, what I am talking about. The under table payments that you make. So this is the cost that you pay for that. So this is a trade-off, basically. That's what I feel.
One question from Dr. Soma Elangovan, who is the president of PTR International from USA. Dravidian Journey has made tremendous strides in quantity. I am glad now we have quality people like Professor and Honorable PTR and all. GVs are successful with their motto, be a tailor or cobbler, but be the best. How can we focus on quality?
That's what now we are trying. I told you, we are wrestling with it. In fact, now we are taking several steps to not only to make it equitable, but also make it more meaningful. Okay, well, both has to be reworked, and we are doing it. So let us hope that some positive results come out of it.
Sir, thank you. So I'm Kaushik. I'm coming from IIT Madras. So one of the basic questions that has been pestering me was regarding job generation. Regarding already Mr. Olivanan has raised this point. So automation is actually causing a job crisis across the world. So even at the national level, people are talking about the job loss economy we are actually entering into. So with that account, with the automation expected to numerically reduce the number of jobs you have, or reduce the number of stable jobs you're going to have, the model or the Dravidian model, which right now, as far as I understand, depends on job generation from private investment. So will this be sustainable job generation? Because per unit of investment, the number of jobs generated is also going down. And I don't have the exact numbers, but my hunch from some of the headlines I see is the drop is a little drastic. So the economic component of the so-called Dravidian model, relying on the job generation from private investment, maybe foreign, maybe domestic. Is it sustainable? That's my essence of the question. Yeah.
No, the problem that you are talking about is not confined to Tamil Nadu alone. What you're talking about is employment elasticity for the investment. It was something like, earlier it was 0.7, 0.8 earlier. Now it has come down to 0.1 and it's very fast, very, very rapidly moving towards, I don't know whether it is zero or what. Because the kind of automation that is taking place. Like to give you one example, like the Hyundai, when it came for the first time to Chennai, for the kind of investment they made, they could generate about something like 16,000 employment opportunities. When they went for the second unit, it was hardly 1,000 people. Because many of the subcomponents were completely automated. And I used to give another example. When I went to Germany, they took me to a steel factory. It was employing something like 20,000 people earlier. When they modernized it, it hardly had 500 people employed. That employment also is not semi-skilled or blue collar. It was all white collar jobs. It was completely automated. They were sitting in some control room somewhere above the factory, and they were just observing the screen. That's all. So this kind of transformation is taking place all over the world. Now, how do we address all these things? Like, for instance, we need to have our focus on several fronts. It was not just blind kind of bring in just the investments. Like last week, they have opened 2 shoe factories, and those 2 factories are again employs nearly about 20,000 semi-skilled women workers. That is at one end. At another end, you see, because of the problems in Bangalore and Karnataka, many of the global capability centers are coming to Chennai. Those are all very high-end jobs, kind of, all completely white-collar jobs. And also, we have another question, like, for instance, the kind of investments that come in and the kind of employment that it throws up, whether it really benefits laborers from our state, that is another question that we have. Like, for instance, if you bring in, let us say, a textile park, do you think our laborers will go and work in this, soil their hands at that job? Already, half of the workers in Tirupur are not from our state. They're all from migrant workers. And if you go to the Sriperumbudur belt, you find almost all of them are from the other states because the local supply is completely exhausted. About for 100 kilometers, on either side. Because they send buses and vehicles to fetch the laborers. And agriculture is not of very great importance now. Weaving is completely collapsing because of the kind they couldn't compete with the kind of wages that the industry could pay. Now, the point is we are well aware of these problems. Now, you can't escape it completely. You can't just say that we will invite in industries which will only focus on creating more jobs. You need to have all kinds of things, but we will not shut doors for the new kinds of things because you can't miss the bus. Like, for instance, when the entire population becomes very aspirational, they want high-end jobs. Now, you need to have a global capability center policy specifically for that to bring in them as well. You can't say that we will have only shoe factories. So we are trying to address the whole spectrum.
So what kind of impact do we have on social media?
Yeah, I mean, again, I echo the professor's comments. This is not a Tamil Nadu problem. This is not an India problem. It's a global problem. My friend Praveen Chakravarti had an article op-ed in the Hindu maybe about 2 or 3 weeks ago, where he said at one point every extra percentage growth in GDP used to create X lakhs jobs. Then that was like the 90s. Then the 2000s, it was half that. Now it's half of that after 2010. So it's a quarter of what it used to be. But at some level, this is a different version of the Marxian view of returns to capital keep increasing and returns to labor keep decreasing, right? The ability to get paid. But we are not the first society that's going through it. I lived in the US and I saw the transformation pretty dramatically in the 20 years that I was there. In our case, I would say there are some good things and there are some not so good things. The good things are among them, starting first, number one. The extent of automation in agriculture has freed up a lot of human potential that was otherwise engaged in relatively not high productivity work. Now, we got, actually, I'll step back a second. There are two bigger issues than just earnings and mobility and this, that. There's a moral issue here, right? In an advanced society, what are the types of work that people should do? Obviously, we are all agreed there shouldn't be any manual scavenging. That's a different issue. But if you take a global leader, for example, in the country of Norway, they don't have a single toll booth with a human being. It's 100% automated, and it requires a bit of adapting if you don't live there. But they have a philosophy that says the job of sitting in a booth and collecting money from people who go by is not a fit job for an advanced society. That's not the kind of human being that we want in our society. So that's one extreme of it. The other extreme of it is to say that if you try to go in a completely white-collar work, you are going to find yourself with significant skill shortages because there are many jobs that simply cannot automate even if you want, right? So all I can tell you is that the government is seized of the problem, and we have looked at it multiple ways. We have changed our incentive policy in the industries department to focus on employment. For the first time, we have started talking about how much of it is local employment. You have to show that they're actually Tamil labor and not labor from outside to get the incentive. It's a free country. You get whoever you want to work. We have no problem. You want us to subsidize you? It should be local labor, at least some percentage. We have started to look at MSMEs as the real engine of employment. Of course, the high-end industries will have very little manual work, but they will throw off secondary, tertiary from suppliers. You take a Hyundai. Hyundai employs X thousand people. Hyundai has tier 1 OEMs that employ probably 10X people, then tier 2 OEMs. So if you can get the content requirement that the content has to be gotten locally, the supply chain, Hyundai basically assembles, right? Like there's probably 4 levels of actual manufacturing before it comes to Hyundai for putting into the car. So there's different ways of looking at things like that. But the real, you live in a competitive economy. It's not as if you exist by yourself. If you decide you're going to have a different labor model, it doesn't work. You have to compete in a global economy, and whoever has the productivity that is cheaper than the alternative is going to be the winner. So our job as a government is to broadly increase the per capita productivity as far as possible from the education, training, skill development, non-Muthaiah, all these other things, just make it much more competitive in terms of the resources. Incentivize the right kind of industries to come and set here. Some of it may be for leading edge, some of it may be for second tier, third tier, some of it may be direct employment like the shoe manufacturing. We have a lot of incentives, not just because it's tens of thousands, but it's tens of thousands of women. And so we want to encourage employment of women. And there's going to be a whole host of industries where you cannot get automation in the hospitality sector, for example. To get the rooms cleaned and to get the food made and stuff, there's only so much automation you can do. You can't like have robots as waiters yet at a cost-effective way, right? So these are places where I think you have to legislate carefully. But if you take places like Australia, there are people who can make a decent living being a restaurant wait staff, right? Because the minimum wage is like $18 or $20 an hour. You can have a good life and be a specialist at doing that. So it's a delicate balance. We are constrained by the global variables of extent of automation, cost of automation, relative ease of automation, and the competitiveness of our neighbors and other people in the area. Within that, I would say we are slightly better off than most other states, but our policy has to be very nuanced and very dynamic. It has to keep changing with the times, and hopefully we'll manage to do that.
It's time to thank. It was a lovely evening that we had today. I'd like to thank Dr. PTR Palanivel Thiagarajan, Minister for Finance and Human Resource Development, Government of Tamil Nadu, for leading this session. And I also would like to thank Professor Jeyaranjan for taking part in this discussion on his book and also taking questions on other subjects related to economics. And also want to thank Mr. Panneerselvan, a colleague, for moderating this session. And also want to thank all of you for joining with us this evening. I also want to thank the government of Tamil Nadu for recognizing the work that we have been doing. And we are committed to doing this work. And we hope we will get more support, both from the government and also from all of you. Thank you very much. Have a nice evening.